All right, everybody, this is Eric Hayden. I am a rose grower across Eastern North Carolina. Really appreciate you joining me this evening. It's something that we're testing out for the Eastern North Carolina Rose Society. Given our current situation, obviously we can't be holding meetings or any in-person groups of any kind. So we have a meeting coming up scheduled for Saturday, April 4th at 10 o'clock. And I was supposed to do a presentation on rose gardens, creating new beds. So we've tested it out the last couple days. We did a test last night, and this is our second test to make sure everything goes okay. So the whole idea is using the link that you're using now, or as you watch it on TV, this is how you are going to view that presentation April 4th. We'll do another one coming up next Sunday. So if this is something you're interested in, please let us know. Just like you did for tonight, all future live streams will be on my YouTube page. That seems to be the easiest way for folks to get to it. I know we could certainly do Facebook Live and other things, but you need to be logged in for that. So this should work easier. Next Sunday at 7 o'clock, I'll do something on microclimates, roses, and weather. And then the actual meeting slash presentation for the Eastern North Carolina Rose Society will be Saturday, April 4th at 10 o'clock. Again, you can follow the stream itself at the link above. If you just search Eric Hayden and roses, you can also do that as well. And then you'll be able to find that information that you need. So trying something new, comment below. Would be curious what you think in terms of what we're doing here. If you like it, share it with other rose enthusiasts, because I know we don't have a lot of live opportunities like this. So we'll do more if it's popular, but it won't be popular if people don't know about it. So definitely help us spread the word. So the presentation tonight is going to be pretty short. I'm trying to keep most of these to about 20 minutes or less. We're going to talk about advantages of growing a small rose garden. I've done this presentation a few times before, up for the Syracuse Rose Society and across the Carolinas. A lot of focus is spent on people that exhibit roses, and I think some people may become intimidated and think that they need this really big garden in order to be able to compete or have roses, and that's just not true. And we'll kind of talk about some of those advantages here tonight. Just a little bit of background. My father's in the middle picture. He was a big rose grower in the 90s and the 2000s. Won a lot of district local shows and competed at the national level across the DC, Maryland, and Virginia area. At the time, I was a teenager, so I wasn't really interested in rose shows at all. That's not my picture in the upper left, but that child digging holes, that's what I felt like, because that's pretty much all I did. When a new rose needed to be planted, a lot of times if we needed to get rid of an old one, we call it shovel pruning, that would be me. We had some clay soil, so it felt like I was digging forever. The wheelbarrow, the weeding, I did all that, so applying mushroom compost and mulch and stuff like that. But as far as pruning or spraying or anything rose show related, not really. Just wasn't really interested in it. With that said, he really instilled a green thumb in me. I was always interested in growing things. So you flip forward ahead, and I was had my first house in New York in 2012, and I had a garden of my own. We grew mostly perennials and vegetables. I did want to grow some roses. I had a few exhibition roses to start off with, things like Gemini and Moonstone. Not so much that I wanted to enter any rose shows, but I really, really wanted to have some roses that had staying power, and as a cut flower I could give to other people, and they would be interested in them because they would last so long. But again, most of my roses, Double Delight, Mr. Lincoln, were not grown for exhibition. This is just for fun, no aspirations for a rose show. Hold that thought for a second. 2013, I joined the Syracuse Rose Society. Really appreciate those members up there for really taking me under their wing and having a society. I lived in Binghamton, New York, so I drove 90 miles one way to attend that society, because at the time that's the only one we had. If you're a local society watching, the way I found out about them was they had a website. So if you're looking for new members, if you're looking for younger people, I would highly recommend that you have at least a Facebook page, and even better yet, I would recommend having a website so that you can direct people to your meetings. Not to go too much on a tangent, but again, how do you expect people to show up if they don't know that you exist? So that year, I grew 7 more roses. They happened to be all exhibitions, so now I'm up to 14. And then the following year, it really started to take off. Most of my vegetables were gone, and I increased to 39 roses, mostly for exhibition purposes. And we're talking about local rose shows and things of that nature. So I certainly got bit by the bug pretty quickly, and I can't say enough about having that local society for the support, for the guidance to encourage me for growing. So if you haven't joined a local society yet, I encourage you to do so. And if you haven't joined the American Rose Society, that's also a very good society to grow your roses, because you're getting a lot of advice throughout the year, including magazines and a lot of really good information. One of the reasons I think I got so into it was I got bit by the rose show bug. So I would encourage you to consider entering a show. I was very fortunate at my first show. I had a good friend, Andrew Hearn, who was actually my father's friend back when he was exhibiting. He came up with his wife, Julie, to help me groom roses and to know how to complete the tags and things of that. So having a mentor or somebody to help you in your first show is really good thing to have. I won Queen the first show. The picture of Gemini is in the middle, so that certainly helps to you know, give you the rose bug when you do well in the first show. And I won King the second year, or this second show I entered in 2014. 2015 was by far my best year. My roses were established, some of them 2, 3, 4 years old at that point. In my second year, 5 straight queens. Our local shows, I did well there. And then we were very fortunate in Syracuse to have a national show in 2015. So got bit by the rose bug, and it took off pretty quickly. The encouragement with that is consider joining a society, consider doing a show. You never know where it will take you. So what's the point of all this? Is it to brag? It's not. It's to talk about how I got where I was. Certainly came with my dad in terms of instilling that green thumb. Certainly was helped by mentors, either Andrew himself, calling different friends, or joining the society. So that got me along. Then I think the other thing and factor that needs to be considered is I started small and I've stayed small, and that's what the focus of this presentation is going to be. I'm going to go over a lot in terms of what is an advantage of a smaller garden. You have to understand, in the rose world where you're competing in shows, some of these folks have hundreds of rose bushes. So when I say I had 36 or I have 42 now, to the average gardener, that still sounds like a lot. But compared to the big time growers, it's not. And when you see that number 36, keep in mind, you don't even have to do that. You can get away with it 6 roses, 8 roses. You don't need a lot to enjoy yourself, to enter a show, or just to have flowers for enjoyment. So please consider that. So a couple things I want to talk about. The pros, when you're doing fertilization, especially if you're going to do rose shows, you kind of get crazy. I applied alfalfa meal, some type of slow release fertilizer, rose tone. I've used cottonseed meal, all this stuff. And if I'm applying it to hundreds of roses, that cost is going to add up versus only 36, or perhaps in your case, only 6. You might say, well, I can't keep up with this, Eric. If you only have 6 roses to worry about, you certainly can. Another good reason to do smaller gardens, just the sheer space. Think about our ideal conditions. We say 6 to 8 hours of sunshine, away from trees, away from any competition and roots. I don't know about you, but my yard is big, but there's a lot of spots that are just not conducive for growing roses. If you keep it small, it's easier to put it in that best part of your yard to grow. It's easier to keep it away from trees and shrubs and roots and competition. So that's a big advantage, not having to worry about space. Time. It takes time to take care of your roses. It's a good hobby, but it certainly is labor intensive if you want, your roses to be best. Watering, spraying, weeding, all those different types of things, it takes time. And the sheer volume, if you have 2, 3, 8 roses, it's not going to take as much time. For me, I've got to cut the grass, I've got younger kids and a wife, so we've got a lot of activities to do. I don't have all the time in the world to focus on just roses. We mentioned some of the different activities. Roses require a lot of constant care. You don't have to be out there for hours on end certain days of the week, but consistent care throughout the year is a good thing. So maintenance, that's a compost pile up in Syracuse. I would always apply compost to the roses. Pruning, your maintenance could be covering up the roses before frost. There's my spraying gear. May look crazy, but again, wearing that PPE is a good thing when you're out in the garden. So these are all chores that we have to do, and if you multiply it by 50 roses, 100 roses, 150, it could be pretty easy to get discouraged pretty quickly. For my friends up north, I don't have to do it down here, but I will tell you, even though we don't get the cold and snow here in North Carolina, we have a lot of dieback in the spring from being so warm in the winter, and then we get cold inevitably at some point during the spring itself. But maintenance up north, that considered covering up the roses with leaves and snow, so we certainly had to do that. One big reason to do a smaller garden, your significant other. Happy wife, happy life. If you're out in the garden all the time or you're taking over the whole yard, your kids aren't going to appreciate a backyard full of roses if they can't kick around the soccer ball. So again, keeping your hobby small, contained will make the whole family happy for sure. Less weeding. Again, these are all sheer numbers. If you have 50, 100, 200 roses, you're going to have a bigger area to weed in your yard. If you have a smaller amount, perhaps you even do container gardening, your weeding is going to be less. Doesn't magically make it go away. You still need to do those things, but it still allows it to be a little bit more that you can wrap your hands around it. If you are going to do rose shows, it's good to cover the blooms to keep them as perfect as possible. You have less roses to cover. If you do rose shows, some of the local societies do have awards, even at the national level. This is from Syracuse in 2015 for small gardens, and those are usually 50 and under. And again, some folks may chuckle. You may say, 50 roses, that's still a lot. Compared to the big exhibitors, it's not. And you could have 5, 10 roses and enter a category like this where you're not competing against the big ones that aren't eligible because they have so many roses. If you're going to the rose shows, less to bring to the show, so that's an advantage. You can kind of keep your hands around it. This includes if you have family. Again, at the time, I didn't have room to transport, say, a rose cooler and things of that nature. And it's not to say those are bad things, but as you're getting started out, when you go to these rose shows, you may think I can't compete because I don't have all the big stuff. Start small. Even if you have no interest in rose shows, starting small will give you these same advantages as well. If you're going to do a show, prepping for a show itself, if you only have 6, 8, 10 roses to focus on, makes it a little bit easier. I like to hand fertilize. I still do it. I'm not really into the injection irrigation because I want to know exactly how much is being put out. So I use 4-gallon buckets, a 1/4 cup of fish emulsion or Miracle-Gro, anything like that will be the ratio of 1 tablespoon per gallon. So I can still do that because I don't have as many roses. If I had lots, that just wouldn't be possible. We mentioned this before with space. It's all about location, location, location with roses. You want them in the best spot in your yard. If you're trying to put 6 or 12 or 18, I think those are very good numbers to start out. 6 roses, you can get your hands around it and get the maintenance done. You can put those 6 roses just about in any yard and find a good spot for it because it's a small, concise number. Less roses to water, that's certainly true. In New York, I had so little and we got enough rain that I was able to collect the rainwater off our roof. Right now, that's just 2 barrels that you see there, 55-gallon barrels. I did build up to 4, and it was about 200 gallons of water off my back of the garage just with an inch of rainfall. So unless we were in a drought, I was able to exclusively water with rainwater. Again, couldn't do it if I had a lot of roses. And think if you just have a couple roses in pots, a couple minis, 2, 3, or 4, you could hand water with regular rainwater if you so choose because you could tackle it. And I think one of the biggest advantages, and we'll end on this before we go to some of the cons, and then we'll wrap things up. It's just about 14, 15 past the hour, so we're still on track for the 20-minute presentation. Quantity or quality over quantity. You may have a lot of quantity of roses, but you can't focus on them as much. If you have a smaller quantity, you can focus that the quality you have is really good. If you do unfortunately end up moving, rose garden can be tough. You can leave it for the next homeowners. Some people won't mind at all. Others don't want anything to do with it. So if you do decide to move them, up in New York, what we did is we dug up pretty much all of them and sold them back to the Rose Society. I was able to bag them up in plastic, dig them up, and then plant grass. So where you had the perennials and roses from before. We seeded that, and the new owners could do what they wanted. So that is an advantage if you are moving to kind of shut things down. A couple disadvantages, and we're going to wrap things up. Be curious if you have any comments or questions below. I've got my phone on, so if anybody has any comments, I'd be curious to see those as well. And you can certainly do that anytime. You know, even future videos, this will be recorded and live streamed. The recording of the live stream will be done. So there are some disadvantages. You cannot test the roses. So the latest and greatest roses, Ring of Fire is one of the newer ones. I just got it recently. I couldn't get it right away. I had to see if it was a really good rose because I didn't have the space in my garden. If you're going to exhibit roses, you really have to stick to the top roses. You can't have the latest and greatest, as I said, because you just don't have the space for it. And that means less blooms for show. There's no doubt about it. I'm not showing up with as many roses because of that. I say limiting the rootstock variety. Some of us can only get roses from certain vendors because we're like to do rose shows and they're not sold on other varieties. So I don't have the time to buy it on one rootstock and bud it to another. I just don't have the time or space for that. It does limit your variety, not just in names, but your types of roses, hybrid teas and minis and mini floras. It's hard to double up on the best roses. So for example, Moonstone, Veterans Honor, those are all top roses. If I had a bigger garden, I could have 3 of them. So I had a much more likely scenario that I'm going to bring those Moonstones and Veterans Honor to a show, then I just have 1 of each. And your garden can be impacted by winter kill. So for instance here, if I lose one of my Moonstones and I don't have any other, I have to wait a whole entire year to replant it. I've got to wait a year or 2 for it to become established. So if you have multiple varieties and you lose one, you're not happy about it, but it's not as big of a deal. You have less of a margin for error. I want to go back one before we get to how you keep it small. What I mean by doubling up on roses, if you are interested in rose shows, what a lot of the exhibitors will do is they will buy and plant multiple varieties of the best. So in this case, let's say Veterans Honor. Beautiful red rose, grows well, just can't say enough about it. If you have 3 of them, you can prune spread out over the course of 3 weeks and aim for your rose show, and you have 3 weeks of blooms down the road. So it's highly likely you're going to have a Veterans Honor for the show. In fact, almost no doubt you'll have at least something. With a smaller garden, you're at a disadvantage because if you just have 1, you prune it to time for the show, you'll probably have something around the show, but depending on the weather, it could be before or after it. So that's what I mean about hard to double up on roses. A couple more slides and we will wrap things up. So how do you keep it small? Focus on what you want. Do you want roses to give to the neighbors? Just focus on cutting roses. Maybe an exhibition because they hold form and everything. Do you want roses that smell? Just get Double Delight, Mr. Lincoln, maybe some old garden roses. Do you want larger blooms? Just stick with hybrid teas. Do you want minis? That's one reason why I stick to just hybrid teas. Nothing against minis or mini floras. I want larger roses. It's what I like. So aside from one old garden rose and a couple climbers, I only grow hybrid teas. I stick to what I want. I'm sticking to exhibition roses. So focus on what you want and stick with that. You can't be everything to everybody. So just because somebody has 100 roses and every latest variety, you can't do that. Stick to what you want, have a plan, and stick to it, and that will help keep your numbers down. I mentioned focus on bed location and make it ideal. Order and plant just the best show roses. So again, if you want certain show roses and exhibition roses, stick to that. Stick to fragrant roses if you want that. And make sure you're growing the best rootstock. So you might not be able to have the variety, but just stick to what grows best for you. One thing I don't do, but for some of our older rose growers, a consideration, container gardening. One downside is you have to really stay on top of your watering, maybe set up a drip irrigation system for it because pots and containers do tend to dry out quicker. But can you imagine having just a couple minis and pots on a deck? Or not just for our older growers, what about new beginners that we tell these folks just buy 1 or 2 of our hardier minis, put it on a deck and hopefully you get sunshine on your deck. That would be much easier to maintain. So these are things to keep in mind. Stick to what you want. focus on what you want and kind of have a plan and stick to it. Consider things like container gardening, or consider mini roses or roses that don't need as much care. I mean, you still have to do your spraying and your fertilization, but roses that are a little tougher, keep the numbers down, and that should hopefully help out. So I know sometimes there can be a little bit of a delay on YouTube, but we're about 20 minutes into the presentation, so we're right where we want to be. I really appreciate you joining us. If this worked, give it the thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel itself. You will get updates going forward. I'll make this full screen so that you can see everything. So here's the plan going forward. If this is working for you, subscribe, like these videos so people know that they're there and that you're getting the updates so you know when they come up. Right now, our future live streams are planned for down the road. I do have an error right there. In fact, I can probably change it real quick because I just made this presentation. So let me hop out of this. It's actually going to be March 27th, so a week from today. Sorry about that. So we'll go back to that. There we go. I don't want anybody to be confused. Okay, so yes, a week from tonight, same time, same place. That one is going to be on microclimates, roses, and weather. Some of you have seen that presentation before. It's a good one. It goes into weather, how much it can drive your garden. And we talk about the different microclimates in your yard. Really interesting presentation. We'll aim for about 20 minutes with that one. The other one is going to be Saturday morning, April 4th. That's the one that we're really aiming for. 10 a.m. I will do a presentation on building a new rose bed. So that will wrap things up. Again, if you just go to that link, youtube.com/HollywoodHayden, you can find all that information. If you subscribe and click on notifications, you will be notified because I do a lot of videos. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, my boss actually gave me the idea to try to do videos on what I do in the garden. So I think you'd be surprised how many videos are up there, so you can certainly check it out. Appreciate everybody joining tonight. Again, like the page itself, subscribe, and click on the notifications so you get more. Share this with other Rose Societies. You can have my contact information. Reach out to me if your local society wants to consider this. It took me a week, but I figured it out. I think I know the ins and outs of it. The software I'm using is actually free, and YouTube is free to sign up to. So this won't cost you anything. And most of our computers, like mine, already have a built-in mic, or it has a built-in webcam. So you might be closer to streaming for your local society than you realize. So that's it. Thank you very much, and we will see you next Sunday, March 29th. Again, we'll have that date on there. I just realized on the presentation it's the 27th. It's going to be the 29th. It's going to be next Sunday at 7 o'clock. Have a great night, everybody.